They said she was a fool. They said no woman with sense would tie her life to a man who lived alone on a cold ridge, carrying grief like a shadow that never left him. They laughed when she said yes. They whispered that she would regret it by the first winter. But what they did not know, what no one in that valley could have guessed, was that the widowed mountain man they mocked was hiding more than sorrow. He was the last heir to a fortune buried not in gold, but in truth, and loving him would change everything. Before this story unfolds, take a moment to settle in. If you believe in second chances, quiet strength, and love found far from applause, you're in the right place. Subscribe to Rescued by the Ridge and walk these forgotten paths with us. The town of Dry Creek was the kind of place where everyone knew your name, your past, and the mistakes you never lived down. It sat low in a wide valley, pressed flat by wind and dust. People stayed because they had nowhere else to go. She had lived there her whole life, long enough for pity to cling to her like dust on a skirt hem. She was not weak, but she had learned how to stand quietly. When her parents passed, the town brought casseroles and kind words. When the years went by and no husband came calling, the kindness faded. People began to look at her differently, as if she were a question no one wanted to answer. She worked where she could, mended clothes, helped in kitchens, kept her eyes lowered when laughter passed too close. Then one morning, everything changed. Word spread fast in Dry Creek, faster than the wind that bent the grass flat along the trail. She was going to marry the widowed mountain man from the ridge. People laughed. Some shook their heads. Others whispered that grief had made her desperate. The man lived far above the valley, where the trees thinned and the air turned sharp. He came into town only when he had to, tall, quiet, worn down by something no one ever named. Everyone knew his story, at least they thought they did. They said his wife died and took the light with her. They said the mountain changed him. They said no good came from marrying a man who had already buried love once. When she walked through town after the news broke, people watched her like they were waiting for a stumble. She did not stumble. She kept her chin steady, her hands calm at her sides. But that night, alone in her small room, she sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the wall. The laughter echoed louder in the quiet. She asked herself the same question the town had already answered. What kind of future waits on a lonely ridge with a man who carries so much silence? And far above Dry Creek, as the last light slipped behind the mountains, the widowed mountain man stood outside his cabin, unaware that his life and hers was about to cross a line neither could turn back from. The ridge did not welcome visitors. It rose sharp and quiet above the valley, where the air thinned and the wind spoke more than people ever did. The widowed mountain man had chosen it for that reason. His cabin stood alone among the pines, built by his own hands, every beam placed with care, not for comfort, but for distance. When the sun fell behind the peaks that evening, he remained outside, boots planted in the dirt, eyes fixed on the fading light. He had stood there many times before, always at dusk, always when memory crept closest. He had not planned to marry again, not after the mountain took his wife, not after silence moved in and made itself at home. The town thought he was hardened, that grief had turned him cold. They were wrong. Grief had made him careful. Inside the cabin, her things were still where he left them, a cup on the shelf, a folded blanket at the foot of the bed. He did not touch them. Some things were not meant to be moved.
He remembered the night he lost her, the long hours, the helpless waiting, the sound of the wind outside, indifferent to pain. He remembered the promise he made to himself when it was over. No more attachments, no more loss. Yet somehow, against his better sense, he had found himself listening to her voice in town, the woman from Dry Creek, quiet, steady, unmoved by his silence. She had not looked at him with fear or pity. She had looked at him like she was measuring truth. That unsettled him more than grief ever had. He knew what the town said about him. He let them talk. Rumors were lighter to carry than the truth, because the truth was heavier than any pack he had ever worn. He was not just a widower living on a ridge. He was a man who had turned his back on something valuable, something tied to his name, something that would bring questions he did not want to answer. That night he stepped inside and lit the lamp. The soft glow filled the cabin. He sat at the small table and rested his hands on the worn wood. Marriage meant change. It meant opening doors he had sealed shut. Far below, the lights of Dry Creek flickered to life, and for the first time in years, he wondered if the ridge might not be high enough to keep the past away.
The past did not wait for permission. It never did. By the time the sun rose over Dry Creek, word of the coming marriage had settled into the town like dust after a storm. It sat heavy, uncomfortable. There was no planning committee, no music, no gathering in the square. The ceremony was set for a quiet morning, just after church bells rang and people returned to their routines. A simple vow, 2 witnesses, nothing more. She stood in a plain dress she had sewn herself, clean, neat, unadorned. When he arrived, he did not look at the crowd. He kept his eyes on her. That alone stirred more whispers than words ever could. Some thought she would hesitate, that she would glance back, that she would realize too late what she was giving up. She did not. Her voice did not tremble when she spoke her vows. His was low, steady, careful, as if each word carried weight. When it was over, there was no applause, only the sound of boots on dirt as people drifted away. A few murmured good wishes, most said nothing at all. They did not linger. There was no feast waiting, no laughter to stretch the moment. By midday they were already on the trail leading out of town. Her belongings packed light, his horse moving at an easy pace. She did not look back at Dry Creek, not once. The climb toward the ridge was slow. The path narrowed as they rose. Wind moved through the trees like a warning. She felt the weight of every mile, not in her legs, but in her chest. The life she knew was falling away behind her. He rode ahead, then slowed to match her pace, not out of duty, out of awareness. They spoke little. There was no need. Silence did not press the way it did in town. When the cabin came into view, she stopped. The structure stood firm against the slope, weathered, alone. This was her home now. That night, as the wind moved around the walls and the lamp burned low, she lay awake listening to the unfamiliar quiet. Every sound felt larger. Beside her, he did not sleep either. Both of them stared into the dark, bound together by vows made without celebration. And neither knew if the ridge would break them, or if it would reveal the truth they had both been running from. Morning came early on the ridge, not with noise, but with light. A pale glow slipped through the cabin window and rested on the wooden floor. She rose first. The air inside was cold, sharp enough to steal breath. She moved quietly, unsure of her place in this new space. The cabin held the marks of a life lived alone. One chair pulled close to the fire. One plate set on the shelf. She added a second without asking.
Outside, the ridge stretched wide and unforgiving. The wind never fully rested. It tugged at her hair and pressed against her coat like a test. The work began without instruction. Water to be drawn, wood to be stacked, meals made from what little there was. Her hands learned quickly. They had to. The mountain man watched without comment, not from doubt, from respect. Days settled into a pattern, hard, honest, and quiet. The ridge demanded effort for everything it gave. She learned the slope of the land, where the sun lingered longest, where the ground stayed firm after rain. Some nights the loneliness crept in. The silence stretched wide, wider than anything she had known in Dry Creek. But it did not crush her. She spoke when words mattered. He listened. He spoke rarely, but when he did, his voice carried care. Once, as they worked side by side, she asked about his wife, not with curiosity, with gentleness. He paused, long enough for the wind to fill the space between them. She loved this place, he said at last, then nothing more. She did not press. The ridge taught patience. It rewarded those who waited. At night they sat near the fire, not touching, not distant, just present. Trust grew slow, like roots working through stone. And still there were moments, small ones, when she caught him watching her, as if trying to understand how she had come to stand where his past once lived. She felt it too, the sense that the ridge was holding its breath, because beneath the quiet days and careful nights, something else lingered, a weight he had not named, a history the mountain remembered, even if the town did not. And as she began to feel at home on the ridge, she could not shake the feeling that this place was built on more than solitude. It was built on a secret that would not stay buried forever.
The ridge had a way of revealing things slowly, never all at once, only when it decided you were ready. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. The sky was clear, the wind gentle for once. She was cleaning near the far wall of the cabin, moving crates he had not touched in years. He had not told her not to, so she worked carefully, as if handling memory itself. One crate was heavier than the rest, older too, its wood darkened by time. Inside, she found papers wrapped in oilcloth, neatly folded, preserved with care. She did not read them at first. She carried them to the table and waited. When he stepped inside and saw what lay there, his stillness said everything. The ridge fell quiet. Even the wind seemed to pause. "I wasn't looking," she said softly. "I know," he replied. He sat across from her. For a long moment, neither spoke. "These belonged to my father," he said at last, "and his father before him." He unfolded one page, lines drawn by hand, marks showing boundaries she recognized. Land. More land than one man could work alone. He told her how his family once guided traders through the passes, how they were trusted when no one else knew the way, how promises were made, then forgotten by time. When his father died, the responsibility passed to him, and he did not want it. "It was never meant to make us rich," he said. "It was meant to keep people safe." After his wife's death, he walked away from all of it. The papers stayed hidden. The ridge became his refuge. She listened without interruption, without judgment. "What happens if others find out?" she asked. His jaw tightened.
"They come asking," he said, "and asking never stays polite for long." She looked at the maps again, at the careful handwriting, at the weight of legacy pressed into paper. "This isn't a burden," she said. "It's a trust." He did not answer. That night, the ridge felt different, less quiet, as if it had shifted under their feet. And somewhere beyond the valley, unseen and unknown, the past had begun to move again, drawn toward the ridge by a secret that could no longer remain in silence.
The past never announced itself. It simply arrived. The next morning, a rider appeared on the lower trail, a lone figure moving slow and deliberate, not lost, not in a hurry. She saw him first from the cabin doorway. The shape stood out against the pale slope, cutting across ground few dared to travel. When she told her husband, his face changed, not with fear, with recognition. He did not reach for anything. He only nodded once and stepped outside. The rider dismounted near the edge of the clearing, older than expected, weathered by years rather than hardship. They spoke quietly at first, words carried off by the wind, but the tone was heavy. She did not approach. She did not need to. She could feel the weight of the exchange from where she stood. At last, the visitor glanced toward the cabin, toward her. "This isn't finished," the man said. Not a threat, a reminder. When the rider left, the ridge seemed smaller, closer, as if the walls had moved in. Her husband did not speak until the sound of hooves faded completely. "They know," he said. "Who?" she asked. "People who remember my family," he replied. "People who thought the ridge would forget." She waited. "They want me to step back into it," he continued, "to take responsibility I walked away from." The silence stretched. "And what do you want?" she asked. He looked at her then, really looked, not past her, not through her. "I want peace," he said, "but peace has a way of demanding payment." That night he barely touched his food. The fire burned low. Thoughts weighed heavy. She realized then that the ridge had never truly been a hiding place. It had been a pause. Later, as the wind rattled the cabin walls, she spoke the words he feared most. "You don't have to face it alone." He closed his eyes, just for a moment, because choosing her had already changed the balance, and somewhere beyond the ridge, others were beginning to notice.
The night passed without sleep, for either of them. By morning, the decision still hung between them like fog on the ridge, unclear, heavy. He stepped outside before sunrise. The mountains stood quiet, patient as they had always been. They had watched his family come and go. They would watch him decide. She joined him without a word. They stood side by side, looking down toward the valley. "There's more you haven't said," she told him, not accusing, certain. He nodded. The fortune was never money locked away, not coins, not chests. It was land granted through old agreements, safe passages through the mountain routes, rights to guide and protect travelers when no one else could. His family had.
The change did not come with announcements. It never did. It came in small ways, quiet ways. Her husband began riding the old paths again. Not every day, only when needed. He showed others how to move safely through the higher passes, where the ground held firm, where storms turned dangerous without warning. He did not ask for payment, only respect for the land. Word traveled faster than he expected.
It always does. Before long, people from Dry Creek began to look up toward the ridge differently. Not with suspicion, with reliance. The woman they once pitied was seen riding beside him, steady in the saddle, confident in the wind. When she came into town for supplies, heads turned, but the laughter was gone. People asked how she was faring, really asked. She answered simply, "We're doing well." And she meant it. The ridge no longer felt like exile. It felt like purpose. One afternoon, a storm rolled in fast, too fast for a small wagon caught low in the pass. The mountain man went without hesitation. She followed. By the time they returned, soaked and tired, the valley lights were glowing below. Safe. The next day, a basket appeared at the edge of the trail. Food, supplies, no note. Then another, and another. Respect does not always speak. Sometimes it simply shows up. In Dry Creek, people began to tell the story differently. Not about the foolish woman, not about the broken widower, but about the couple on the ridge who knew the mountain better than anyone, who chose service over silence. She heard the change in tone when she passed through town. Less curiosity, more admiration. And still, beneath the improvement, something remained unsettled. The old agreements were not fully claimed. The responsibility was not yet complete. The ridge had accepted them, but the future had not been decided. As she stood outside the cabin one evening watching her husband return along the trail, she knew the hardest choice was still ahead. Not about land, not about legacy, but about how much of themselves they were willing to give to a world that had once laughed and turned away.
The choice did not come from the town. It came from the ridge itself. A meeting was called in Dry Creek, not formal, not official. Men and women gathered in the open space near the old post. Faces familiar, expressions unsure. They wanted the mountain man to take full responsibility for the passes, to make it known, to put his name back where it once stood. It would bring stability, it would bring order, it would bring recognition. He listened without interruption, as he always did. When they finished, all eyes turned to him, waiting. He did not answer right away. He looked toward her instead. She stood at the edge of the group, not pushing forward, not stepping back. Later, alone on the ridge, the question finally found words. "If I accept this," he said, "our lives will change." She nodded. "I know." "They will expect more," he continued. "More time, more responsibility." She took his hand, firm, certain. "I didn't marry you for a quieter life," she said. "I married you for an honest one." The wind carried her words across the slope, clear. He understood then. The legacy was never meant to replace love, only to test it. The next day, he returned to Dry Creek, not to claim authority, but to set boundaries. He agreed to guide, to teach others the routes, to share the knowledge his family guarded for generations. But he would not own it alone. The ridge belonged to everyone who respected it. The town accepted this, some with surprise, others with relief. As they rode back home, the ridge seemed wider, more open. That night, they sat outside under a sky full of quiet stars. No plans spoken, no promises demanded, only understanding. He had chosen love over legacy, and in doing so, had finally honored both.
Time moved differently on the ridge, not measured in days, but in seasons. Winter came and passed without breaking them. Spring followed, soft and patient,
The land remembered their footsteps. The cabin no longer felt borrowed. It felt lived in. A second chair stayed by the fire. A second cup rested on the shelf. Small things, but they mattered. People still came when they needed guidance, but they came with respect, with gratitude. The mountain man no longer carried the weight alone. He taught others what his father once taught him. The passes were safer now because knowledge was shared, not hidden. She became part of that rhythm, welcoming travelers, listening, offering warmth where she could. No one called her foolish anymore. No one pitied her choice. They saw what the ridge had always known, that strength did not shout, it endured. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the valley gold, they stood together at the edge of the ridge. The wind moved gently around them, not demanding, not testing. "This place remembers," he said quietly. She smiled. "So do we." They were not rich in the way the world often measures, but they were secure, rooted, whole. The fortune he inherited had never been meant to be kept. It was meant to be lived. And in choosing each other, they had built something stronger than legacy. They had built a family. The ridge would remember them long after footsteps faded, not as rumors, not as mistakes, but as two people who chose love and found peace where no one thought it could grow.
Thank you for walking this ridge with us. If this story moved you, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what part stayed with you the most. Don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who believes in second chances and quiet strength. Subscribe to Rescued by the Ridge for more stories of love, survival, and redemption from the Old West. And when you're ready, check out the playlist for more tales waiting just beyond the trail. Until next time, travel gently and take care.